The Ecologies Knowledge and Power in the Gulf of St. Lawrence region, circa 1500 to present project, is a SSHRC Partnership Development Grant that was launched in 2023 by myself, Dr. Josh McFadgen, and the late Dr. Elizabeth Mankey, both Canada research chairs interested in the Atlantic region. It was supported by the grant, and its purpose is to share research and develop new partnerships that examine history, environment, and what Dr. Mankey called spaces of power in the Gulf of St. Lawrence region. Her legacy continues to inspire our members and many others who care about the region and its communities. The project is organized around three core themes: ecologies, knowledge, and power, using them as a novel way of understanding complex social ecological systems like the Gulf of St. Lawrence. In 2024, the project kicked off, and it was held at the St. Peter's campus of UPEI, a hybrid event spanning 3 days and including field trips to a number of parks, beaches, and rivers in the area. It was held at the Canadian Centre for Climate Change and Adaptation in beautiful St. Peter's in Epiquet, Prince Edward Island. After Dr. Mankey's passing, Dr. Aaron Spinney from the University of New Brunswick in St. John came on as a co-applicant. And one of our first activities was to launch this first in-person meeting at the University of Prince Edward Island. It was the workshop and the place that Elizabeth wanted to be at, and of course her vision and legacy were there with us. As one of our first activities, the meeting in St. Peter's brought together graduate students, organizations from outside of academia, and of course academics from a number of universities across Atlantic Canada and beyond, to look at the three main themes and to provide research updates on projects that could eventually make their way into published outcomes. Participants gave short presentations, contributed to roundtable discussions, or reflected on drafts of longer papers that had been pre-circulated. Graduate students got to give papers, provide their own research updates, get to know faculty, and make connections with institutions and organizations from outside of academia. In addition to traditional papers and panels, we also held participatory events like a lunch based on Mi'kmaq recipes held by Dr. Lauren Beck and Margaret Augustine, and where they explained some of the cultural significance of recipes from their new book and shared a meal together with us. Graduate students were also featured frequently by Dr. Mankey and I hope by myself and Dr. Spinney. Many of them had the chance to work with her before she passed. One of those was Zachary Tingley, a PhD student at the University of New Brunswick.
In the fall of 1857, Joseph Robinson, an officer for the Prince Edward Islands Revenue Service, attended a call from the harbour master of New London to assist with an American vessel that refused to pay anchorage dues. Robinson hoisted the revenue cutter's colors, and the American schooner Onward replied by hoisting a rag cloth and sailed away. With insufficient arms, Robinson had no choice but to avoid the pursuit and report the event to his superiors. As a collaborator, my work examines the way in which patrol vessels were used to enforce legislation in the common of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and how this shifted the way that jurisdictional power was projected and manifested in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. In doing so, I use legislation as a timeline to track the movement of the fishery patrols in the Gulf that were used to prevent illegal fishing and patrol territorial waters. Enforcement of the 3-mile limit established by the Convention of 1818 was done by both colonial patrols and British naval vessels. This not only created complex jurisdictional arrangements, but also began to shift the Gulf from a common towards a space Britain began to claim sovereignty over. These changes were incremental, but were dependent upon legislation and enforcement at both the colonial and imperial levels. The enforcement, however, was sporadic, and this created the conditions for peoples to push back against officials or those with an intimate knowledge of the Gulf, to evade officials altogether. As a graduate student, being involved with Ecologies, knowledge, and power in the Gulf of St. Lawrence region has given me an opportunity to experience what it takes to bring ideas discussed in a seminar room, pitch them at the 2022 Atlantic Canada Studies Conference, develop them further in collaboration with others, and then to experience the behind-the-scenes organization of a project that has been awarded funding. This is not a process that all graduate students get to witness, let alone be involved with, and for that, I am grateful.
As part of the Gulf project, we organized 3 field trips on our first meeting that helped us experience a range of environments and cultural practices in at least this part of the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence. We toured those beaches at Basin Head and thankfully had Dr. Edward McDonald leading a tour of the PEI Fisheries Museum, which operates at the Basin Head Provincial Park, which is near Surrey. We went to the PEI National Park in Greenwich, touring both the large dunes and the floating boardwalks and the interpretive center operated by the parks. And those who could stayed an extra day and paddled in a tour of the Morel River, exploring one of the watersheds that feeds into the Gulf of St. Lawrence through St. Peter's Bay. River is an ecologically significant area on the southern edge of St. Peter's Bay, known for being the site of some of the earliest conservation efforts on a Prince Edward Island river. So one of the reasons why this conservation effort was possible, however, is because there was really a drop in agriculture. The peak of cleared land had been reached in 1911 on the lots on each side of the river. And even then, only about half of those areas were cleared. Then, by the 1970s, it was less than a quarter. So farmland had been quickly reverting or growing back up into forest. One of the families who farmed in the 19th century was an Irish immigrant, Peter Sinnott. And Sinnott had cleared large amounts of his land with the help of many family members. And he left one big forested parcel on the west edge of the Morel River. We paddled past that parcel and looked at the way that it compared with others and the forests that had grown up on previously cleared parcels. The Sinnott land was left forested so that it could be grazed by his animals, and particularly a large herd of pigs. He was one of the largest producers in the area. But as these farms declined and the area returned back to forested ecosystems, it became one of those parts of the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence that is now today a conservation space and also home to one of PEI's indigenous reserves, the Morel Rear Reserve. And we were able to learn from paddling down that what different land use looks like and how some of these important watersheds have been shaped over time. Some of our future directions now include a number of publications, which would feature ordinary academic papers, but also some of these non-academic partnerships, working with communities and producing publications that feature some of their work in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. Since the St. Peter's workshop, we've been involved in several follow-up activities, including working with Indigenous communities, meeting with our partners, and presenting overviews of the Gulf Project with scholars elsewhere who work on the climate and islands of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. If you are in the Gulf of St. Lawrence region studying some of its people over time, or if you are outside and just interested in contributing, please reach out to us and tell us how your work might fit with the project. We look forward to hearing from you and to our partners in the future.